known for your adaptations of Stephen King stories such as Sleepwalkers, The Stand, Quicksilver Highway, The Shining, and more recently Bag of Bones. I wanted to ask you, what is your collaboration process like with a master storyteller like Stephen King?
Well, it started with him being on the other side of the country and me being in LA, in Maine, and basically doing a script he'd already written with Sleepwalkers. That was our first experience together. And so the collaboration on that end was they had hired a director who'd rewritten it into something nobody wanted, and they brought me back to bring it back to what Steve had done while incorporating what the studio was interested in. He's a guy who, once you have his trust, he doesn't interfere. But when you have Stephen King, you're an idiot to not want to take advantage of having access to him. So, in the case of Sleepwalkers, which was the first time, it was a matter of developing that trust. He knew I was a writer as well, and there would be changes that the studio would want, and I would offer to do them, and sometimes I did them, but I would always run it past him, and see, say, look, I'm going to do this. And he would say, well, let me have a crack at it. And the next day there'd be pages in the fax machine back in the day. And they would be fantastic. And so, it was a really great collaboration from a distance. I never met him till he came out. He was on the set for 2 hours doing his cameo and then gone.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
But it was lots of fun. Then we really got closer in the screening room in New York when my cut was done. And he had approved to see that. And so he and Tabby were the only people there at the screening that went along. Like, he was hooting and hollering and laughing and jumping and, every kind of great reaction you'd want.
That's great.
So it was a matter of developing a trust. And we became friends after that when he said, look, they're going to do a miniseries of The Stand. Would you be interested in directing? And, we became friends, and it was easy to talk to each other and communicate with each other. And I really respect what he's done. He knows there's a difference between movies and TV and books. And no matter what the movie is, it's not going to fuck up the book. Whether it's a good or bad movie, the book is still good. And we've developed a really great trust between each other. I mean, I trust him explicitly.
Yeah, right.
And it's really turned into as much friendship as a working collaboration. So, we haven't done anything together in a few years. This thing I'm working on now, we'll see what happens. But, he is very playful. And being on a movie set, it's like a giant train set, toy train set.
Really?
And he really has fun with it. So, that kind of collaboration, it's work and play at the same time. It's not just about what we're making, but an atmosphere on the set. My sets are usually pretty happy places to be, and everybody gets respect, and we're all in it together. Everybody wants to do the best work possible. And King is very much on board, yet he really loves to have fun. So it's really fun on The Stand. Gary Sinise and I and one of the other actors, we all kind of play guitar. Sinise better than any of us. And, we're shooting the scene where Adam Stork is singing Eve of Destruction out amongst all these dead cars. And so in between takes, we've all got guitars around our necks playing Eve of Destruction and all this stuff. So, it's really an atmosphere as much as it is an artistic endeavor.
I didn't know you played guitar.
I don't play guitar well.
Well.
I play guitar like I play piano. I play claw piano, chords, and guitar chords. But I was in a band for 7 years when I was in my 20s.
Oh, no kidding.
Well, 18 to 25, all original prog rock band. Opened for the Kinks and some other bands.
Oh, cool.
Great fun.
What was the most influential element that you learned about horror storytelling from Stephen King? Was there something in particular that you learned about horror that you you learned specifically from him?
Well, I think it's something that I'd always felt intuitively, but what I really learned is keeping it real. You know, the characters and the world are real. And to found that reality, you know, he writes his characters so believably. We all identify with them. We all are his characters. You know, they shop at Walmart, they go to McDonald's, all the things that real human beings do. And that if you have a reality basis, then you can take it somewhere else. Once you've established a real world, you can go to an unreal world and make it believable.
Yeah.
And you can buy into it. And I think that's the most important lesson for me to learn from Stephen King, is the reality of it first. My philosophy is great horror is great drama plus. You know, it's drama amplified. And you know, the stuff that I don't give a shit about is, you know, monsters that come from nowhere, that just, you know, slasher movies, things like that. They're just all about the effects and not about the story and the people. I started as a writer myself, and have been writing since I was 12. And so story and character have always come first. It's not to say that that's how it always should be. You know, go back as far as Unshain Andalou, Buñuel and Dali working together. It's just a series of shocking sequences, and that was fantastic. But as far as I'm concerned, the most potent is a reality-based story.
It's an interesting fact that, like, early on in your career, you shot behind-the-scenes footage for classic films like The Howling, The Goonies, The Fog, Videodrome, Gremlins, and even Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom. I think anybody like me who was a kid during those days would
like me
be
too.
like wow, that's so cool. What did the experience of being on set and watching these filmmakers work teach you about becoming a filmmaker on your own?
It taught me a lot, and it didn't teach me a lot. One of the things I learned off the top was that most of the real work is not done on the set. You know, all the discussions with the DPs, and the director, the actors, before you get to the set, so much of the work has been done. The design, you know, storyboards, all those things. But I learned protocol, you know, and that there are echelons, you know, of priority. Once I was in Toronto on a shoot that I had co-written a script, and I was assisting the director, Alfred Sowell, on Tanya's Island. Tanya's Island was the name of the movie. It was made in Canada. The guy who had made Alice, Sweet Alice, which is a great movie from that era. And so I'm standing there in the corner, and the sound boom guy says to me, not the boom guy, sound recorder, "Who are you?" "Well, I'm so-and-so, and I co-wrote the script." "Because you're in the way." "Oh, okay." So that protocol I learned quickly. But the big thing was how much work is done off the set, and how much you don't learn while watching, except you see different ways that different people work, how Steven Spielberg works with actors and the DP and the like, and John Carpenter, you know, is somebody more technically oriented, or they're more performance oriented. You know, a blend of the two is kind of, you don't often get it as complete as Steven Spielberg does, for example. You know, always talks with the actors and always has a very technical mind.
So he's more of an actor director, but still on the technical side. So
Very
it's kind of been
so.
down the middle.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
they're very important to him.
Very cool.
And you know, learning those things and doing that on Amazing Stories was so great, because I was able to see the before, during, and after.
Yeah.
And,
I love that show, by the way.
Well,
I remember seeing that when I was a kid on TV. We all, just like in the beginning, you'd all gather up around the TV and be like, Amazing Stories is on, Amazing Stories is on, yeah.
the great ones were
So
great.
It's really great.
The terrible ones were terrible.
There's got to be like a lot of behind-the-scenes material that's probably never even seen the light of day.
A lot of it was shot 16 millimeter.
Oh, really?
Oh. In fact,
I guess it would have been, yeah.
all of the making ofs I did were 16 millimeter. Universal may have all of the footage I shot on the thing, but probably don't. Have no idea where it is, I'm sure.
Oh, it's too bad.
But most of the good stuff got in there, even though they were only 8-minute documentaries for the most part.
Yeah.
But some of them, I had all that footage and I had no idea where it is.
Yeah.
I found all this Gremlins, making of Gremlins stuff. I had a box of all these dailies and everything. And it finally went bad. You know, they were able to use a bunch of it. I guess there's a new anniversary Gremlins Blu-ray.
Yeah.
And I better get it. Cause
Yeah, I better get it. I want to get it too.
Because I think they were able to save some of it. At first they said it's gone to vinegar, you know, but then they called me back and said there was a bunch of stuff we were able to use. I had hours of stuff, of course, but mostly boring.
When working with actors, how do you determine what is a truthful performance? How do you determine what is a truthful performance and what is not?
Well, you feel honesty intuitively, you know. You can tell if it's put on. But the main thing is how you work with actors. They all have different processes. You know, you figure out this is an actor who takes a little ramping up, so you do their coverage second. You know, this is an actor who's best when it's their first or second take and they lose steam. Shoot them first. Sometimes they'll have the same process or it won't matter. But the honesty in it is the naturalness of it. I guess the best test is if people who are observing can't tell the difference of what's going on before you say action and after you say cut. You know, a conversation will be going on and they're the same before action as they are after action, you know, that it feels almost different. And that they're not acting. You know, the whole point is putting yourself in the circumstances. If it were Danny Draven in this building that is collapsing because there's an animal burrowing underneath that wants to suck you down to the realm of hell. You know, that it's not you playing a guy who would be sucked down to the realm of hell, but your experience if it did happen to you in reality. But I think it's more intuitive than
it's more intuitive. That's all. Yeah. Well, it's like, you know, a lot of directors, you know, like I know Hitchcock is famous for saying that 75% of directing is casting, and I think
Absolutely.
even someone, there was another one, I think it was Schlesinger or someone else said they put that number at 65%, and then there was another director, I think that put it somewhere around 50. And I always thought, when I first heard that, years ago when I first heard that, I was like, you know, there's so much truth to that, because, you know, when you hire somebody like, in Hitchcock's case, you know, when you get Cary Grant or somebody.
You could get anybody you want.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but,
and that's the thing, too, because in a genre film especially, there's a lot of snobbishness about it. So, who you can get who is willing to play something in an extreme film or an extreme role, availability, pricing, enthusiasm. You don't want an actor who just wants to take the job. You want an actor who wants to be there. You know, to be able to get Pierce Brosnan for Bag of Bones, who hadn't done TV in 15 years, you know. He's a guy who likes to try new things and really went for it. And that was somebody who, I didn't know, you know, he was a big movie star. It was a gamble. We met and had a great meeting, but, you know, is he going to get into it? He's never really done this kind of genre before. But he brought this incredible sense of reality. And I know it had to be difficult for him because he's a guy who lost his wife. And he plays a guy who loses his wife. And the reality of his reaction to her loss, this character is killed right in front of him. Not in front of him, but he's in a bookstore when he hears a bus crash and he goes out and it's his wife who's been killed, his wife. It goes so far and so emotional, you know, that I was tempted to pull it back, but I dare not, because the reality he brought to it came from a much deeper place.
I remember that scene, yeah.
It really was, you know, I'm way too embarrassable to be an actor. And I think you have to be beyond embarrassment to be a really great actor. You have to be willing to be naked, you know, for your psyche to be exposed. And that's where the honesty comes from. It comes from experience too. A 20-year-old who's had everything is not going to have the depth of someone who's lived a longer life and had obstacles that they had to overcome.
Right.
You know, as a writer, as an actor, as a director, as a painter, as a musician, the more you experience out of life, the deeper your art becomes.
Right.
And in that case, it was a sense of loss that had brought honesty to this role, and the ability for him to confront that loss that he experienced in real life and bring it to the screen.
I mean, for you, I mean, it was always intuitive, you know, I think. But did you ever?
I never studied
take an acting class or just
no.
see the
Well,
process?
I've sat in on a couple of acting classes. A great actor is beyond ego. You know, is someone who's willing to be small and willing to be large, and willing to be, you know, to expose the psychological issues that he's dealt with or would deal with had he or she been in that situation. That sort of thing. So, you know, a lot of people become actors the same reason they join bands is to get laid, or, you know, or to be famous.
Mm-hmm.
And usually they're not the ones who have any longevity. They have some success. It's about love. Fame and fortune also can make an artist reach less, I won't say make them lazy, but less adventurous. Especially if you reach tremendous success. It can either liberate your artistry, or it can limit it and make you feel, I know how to do this, and this is how I'll do it for the rest of my life.
Yeah. I think it was, what is it? So I love that Stanislavski quote about the, you know, do you love the art in yourself or yourself in the art? You know, I think that's kind of
I haven't actually heard that.
Yeah. Do you either love the art in yourself, or do you love the art in yourself, or yourself and the art? And that's what Stanislavski used to tell his students, his acting students.
Wow.
And when I first heard
that's
that,
pretty
I
profound.
always remembered that, and I always tried to look at myself too and think, you know, what am I doing this for? Am I doing it just because I want to? I mean, just, you know, do you want to be famous or be rich or this and that? And I'm like, no, it's not. You know, it's deeper than that. And, and I actually have that quote written on my board in my thing. So every time I write or whatever, I look at it just to remind myself, you know, kind of why. In a horror film, what would you say are the key elements to truly scaring an audience? I mean, it could be one thing, two things. Is there any particular things that really that are key to scaring?
There's the technical aspect. You know, we've been brought up with unnerving sound design and dread and building of tension and making you go boo. Making you jump and go boo is the easiest thing. Again, I'm going to go back to reality. You know, the more real it is, the more sense of fear that you can identify with the actors and the actors expressing that fear. It's really important. But misdirection, just like in magic and in comedy, you lead somebody down one path and take them to an unexpected place, whether suddenly or not. You know, that is fear. Building a sense of identity on the audience part, that if you can identify with what the character is going through, scare the shit out of that character, there's a good chance you'll be able to take the audience along with it. But that sense of reality and surprise and adventurousness, you know, you can be surreal as opposed to just real in the horror genre. It's why it's my favorite genre, because you can be expressionistic as well as real. That you can enter into realms of the psyche and inner life as well as outer life. And if you can blend those two together, and so many fears are universal, and there's a commonality of fear among people of all cultures, and traveling to different countries and festivals around the world, I've seen that. But sometimes they're expressed in different ways. So I love when maybe you'll take an Asian concept of fear and their approach to ghosts and how they feel about them, and bring it to a Western consciousness. You know, you take these tastes, because the fear itself is communal, but the taste may be different. It may be a different recipe, and you can bring something new to something already founded within you.
Yes.
That is when you can take somebody by surprise.
Yes.
And surprise is a big part of fear. Like it's a big part of comedy. It's the unexpected.
Yes.
Comedy and horror are so similar because they're best shared with an audience. They go for a visceral and physical reaction, a laugh or a scream or a jump, or they're all very intertwined with one another. They're active rather than passive entertainment.
Stuart once told me that when I was talking about Reanimator just at his house or whatever we were doing, he said, he said that comedy is the antidote to fear. So he would, or to
it's a great way to put it.
And I always remembered that because I thought about that and I was like, how can Reanimator be scary, bloody, but still kind of fun and funny?
It's really
and then he's like, well, you put the scare in and then you relieve that tension with a laugh. And I was like, oh. And ever since he told me that, I've always remembered that as
that's a Hitchcockian thing too. You disarm.
Right. Disarm.
And Joe Dante's really great at that too.
Yeah.
There's also a defensiveness that comes with making a horror film that if you were to just tell somebody what these ridiculous things are that happen that couldn't happen in real life, it's hard to take them seriously. So if you disarm with a joke, then it's a great way to pay off after a scare. And so many times, if you're in a movie theater and there's a big jump or scream that the audience shares, that there's a relief and an embarrassment that makes them laugh afterwards because they had a really good time.
Right.
But disarming, if you're in a conversation like we're having here, but something really funny, back and forth, joke, and that's interrupted by something horrendous.
Right.
It's not just a shock, but it's organic. And the more organic the fear is, the more deeply rooted it is. Because for me, I remember John Carpenter saying this when I was interviewing him for one of the making-ofs, that I could run black leader through a projector, have a white cell, and a really loud noise, and it'll make you jump. But you won't think about it anymore. It'll just be black leader and bang! It's like going boom!
Yeah, right.
And that works for a few seconds, and then you forget about it. But if you can get somebody viscerally where they live, and certainly loss is one of the most horrific things that can happen. A young audience has not normally experienced loss, and most horror audiences are very young audiences. And so there's a way to try and identify with that. They haven't had a Sixth Sense experience, but they will have a House of a Thousand Zombies, a House of a Thousand Corpses experience. But that's valid too. What they're doing is, to me, horror is to film what heavy metal is to music. It's you want to embrace something your parents won't. It's a great breaking away thing, and it's a spit in the eye of mortality because you've never experienced mortality. So
it's a good analogy. I like that.
I think it's really good for you, and a lot of people really hate extreme horror, and I'm not a fan of most of it, unless it's, if Miike does it, that's an artist who does it, and it's part of the story he's telling. If in the hands of an artist, extremism in anything can be revelatory and fantastic. But making horror movies for teenagers, that's what the American studios think it's all about, that horror's for kids. And so they make horror for kids. But when you get a Guillermo del Toro doing Devil's Backbone or Pan's Labyrinth or something, it's so much deeper, more sophisticated than that. And it's hard to do that for 20-year-olds. So it's more recreational. It's more about spitting in the eye of mortality. The blood and guts and all that stuff is a celebration of we're never going to die. We're at the peak of our lives right now. It's fun, and it's like fuck you, and it's like putting up a middle finger and in revolt to everything around you. And that's really healthy. That's really good stuff, and I feel like that sometimes too. But when Peter Jackson did it, it was incredibly liberating. But in the hands of hacks that just think that it's all about the splat and not about the splattered.
Yeah.
It's just another one of those things.
Yeah, and that's I think a big distinction, because between this, that, like you said, between like hacks, and it's just all about the splatter and all that stuff. Because having made like these low budget B movies like so many years ago, it was just seemed like we were making. I think actually one guy told me, he said, when I started working at Full Moon, he said, we don't make movies here, we make box art. And
Right.
I was like,
That's
I
depressing.
didn't even know what he meant by that. I was just kind of like excited because I was like 20 years old. I mean, I was just
Sure.
like kind of, oh my god, it's a movie, dude, it's
Yeah.
set, right? So it was exciting. And then years later, I thought about that and I was like, and then I started to really realize what he's meaning, because some of the movies were just like, yeah, they were just really just plugging in something into the box, you know?
Yeah, well, it's like
And that is
in
depressing.
television,
Yeah.
filling the gaps between commercials.
Yeah.
And it is depressing because
Yeah.
horror doesn't have to cost money, and it's one of the reasons that
Yeah.
Hollywood likes it so much, because it doesn't require movie stars, and you can sell a concept. But it doesn't cost anything to do something well. To have decent production values, yes, obviously, but less so today than ever, because digital filmmaking has allowed us to give production value that costs nothing.
Yes.
But it's the ideas that are rich. You don't need a $50 million movie to be great. Yes, if you want to hire George Clooney and Angelina Jolie, and they're worth what they get paid,
Yeah, right.
because they bring people in,
Yeah.
and they are special.
Yeah.
They bring an entire history of who they are to the screen, and you have some expectations there. And they're incredibly valuable when they play against those expectations in a different kind of role. Angelina Jolie as Maleficent is not what you expect, and that's in a huge Hollywood studio context.
Yeah.
But a good idea costs nothing. Sometimes it takes money to tell the story if it's a more elaborate story being told. But ideas are cheap. And talent is more rare than we would like it to be. But talent costs nothing until it has had a value placed on it by an employer or a studio or a network or something like that. But it's really hard to get ideas made, especially original ideas.
Yes.
But it seems to be a little more open in the independent world than the world. But that leads to the democratization of filmmaking by the resources everybody has at their fingertips. You can make a movie with your iPhone. Even Mick did that.
Yeah.
And everybody on their computer can edit whatever they want, do sound design and all that. So democracy in all things is great, but not so much in art. Because the good news being anybody can make a movie, the bad news being anybody can make a movie.
Right.
And so how do you find the jewels amidst the dross?
Yeah. Especially now with distribution too. It's one thing if they made all those movies and they never saw the light of day except among friends. But now with distribution the way it is, it's like you're seeing movies that were made for whatever, $10,000, $15,000 or whatever, right next to a $50 million movie at Redbox or something.
Exactly.
And just being able to sort of find the gem and all that. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
What is the biggest mistake you see young directors make on their first horror film? Are there any things that you see pet peeves and bad? So
the main one is hiring your best friend as your lead.
Yeah. Right.
Seriously.
Yeah. No kidding.
It's funny, but it's 90% of the movies are made that way.
Yeah.
Go to a fucking university and go to a film class or an acting class or the local theater.
Right.
And find the best people you can, because the first mark of amateurism, apart from production value, is bad acting.
Yes.
And know the difference between good and bad acting. We're in another era. Since the 70s, we've been in a long era of movie brats, where people make movies based on movies, rather than movies based on life. And so they're imitating things that have come before. And when you hire, you do your technical stuff because you want a cool shot, but it really needs to be an eloquent shot. not an impressive shot. A shot that best expresses the emotional tone the scene is trying to set, to amplify the drama. And if your best friend is a really funny guy at parties, it doesn't mean he's going to carry your movie.
Yeah.
And the performances in a film are what carry it more than anything else, more than the script, more than the effects, more than anything else, is your willingness to spend time with these people. And it's the first sign of amateurism.
Excellent insight to that, because I couldn't agree with you more. My God, it really is.
Yeah, it's the one thing that I've said in film classes.
Yeah. For you, what makes a great movie monster or villain? It could be either one, and why?
You know, it's so open to interpretation. It's something new. You know, one of the things I love is that no evil person thinks they're evil. Ted Cruz surely thinks he's a really terrific fellow, you know? And that's something that, again, speaks to the reality of the story and the characters and the honesty of the characters. You're not... Sometimes, of course, it's gleeful, but I guess it's a sense of sometimes... Well, in Manhunter, for example, I thought Brian Cox's Hannibal Lecter was so new to me. I'd not seen a character like that before, and of course Anthony Hopkins came along and totally redefined it in another way, which was every bit as magnificent, if not more so. But taking a character with evil intent, but presenting it in a way I haven't seen it before. You know, sometimes it can be operatic, as indeed Anthony Hopkins was. Ron Perlman in Desperation, you know, when we did that together, he was so great and he was so delicious that the movie definitely takes a nosedive after he's gone. It's being captivated by this character that drives you, because everybody knows the most interesting characters are the villains, you know, the most memorable characters. You remember Darth Vader more than Luke Skywalker, you know. So that's the opera of it. But to take it someplace new, to find it as the two Hannibal Lecters did, well, the Hannibal TV series, I think, is fantastic.
Yeah.
You know,
I haven't saw it. I haven't gotten into it yet.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, at first I wasn't sure. Yeah. You know, this is not Hannibal Lecter the way I remember him, and I remember Quentin Tarantino saying, "I don't know if I can watch it. It's just not me." But it's great art. This show, 2 or 3 episodes in, I believe you'll be completely captivated by the darkness of it and the textures. You know, this sophisticated character played by Mads Mikkelsen this time is just so filled with culture and art and beauty that the horrific murders that take place in this show are fantastically beautiful. They're unbelievable. You see the results of these murders, not the murders taking place, but the results of them are brilliant flesh sculpture, basically. You know, and I think just taking me somewhere I've never been that's the long way of saying it, I guess. But taking me somewhere I've never been with a character, whether it's a villain or a hero, is the way to my heart, the dark soul of my heart.
Cool. Right on. No, I think that's helpful. What your favorite horror film is of all time, and how it has influenced you as a writer and filmmaker.
I don't have one favorite horror film of all time. It's kind of a shifting thing.
Well, what are some of your favorites?
Dead Ringers is one of them. That, you know, the Cronenberg film.
Yeah.
That took me someplace I never knew I wanted to go.
Yeah, definitely.
Genius. I mean, Jeremy Irons' performances in that movie are so good.
Yeah.
And the surgical instruments for mutated women.
Yep.
Holy shit, what a great concept.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And the design of those instruments, which I saw at the Cronenberg exhibition up at TIFF in Toronto. And that's one of them. the original Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein. Bride of Frankenstein brings a sense of humor to something that had never seen humor before. Yes, it was 1935, but horror films had been around since the early silence.
Right.
And Ernest Thesiger, just this giant, grander-than-life character, was creating these doll people, and yet it was still a really scary movie. Of course, Silence of the Lambs is one of the great all-time.
Any newer ones, like some stuff that you've seen recently? I mean, it doesn't have to be a favorite, but something that you thought that was really...
It's still a long time ago, too. The Sixth Sense was great.
Sixth Sense, yeah.
I really like the first Hostel.
Yeah.
I like it a lot.
Yeah.
Guillermo del Toro's horror films, Pan's Labyrinth and Devil's Backbone, are works of genius, and they're really artistic. And I loved Bubba Hotep, and I loved, again, that's several years ago.
Yeah.
And stuff back in the early '80s, the original, John Carpenter's The Thing, and Landis's American Werewolf in London, and things like that. But in later years, it's mostly been franchises.
Yes.
The original Saw was great, and there's really great imaginative stuff in there, but they haven't stuck to my psyche. But then again, it's also an age thing. Horror in this country is aimed at the young, and the most visceral image. That's a cool card.
Yeah. Classic.
The images stick with you in your youth when you're changing, when you're becoming who you are. And I don't want to stay who I am in terms of creativity. I don't want to calcify, but there have been fewer movies in recent years that have stuck with me viscerally as they did in my youth. And I think that's a natural thing in evolution, in the evolution of an individual as well as the evolution of a culture, of a society, or even an artwork.
Tell us about MickGarrisInterviews.com and what's maybe some students of film or horror can maybe learn from going to your site.
Yeah, well, that was the point. That was the whole point of putting them online.
Yeah.
Was to just give it to everybody, because these are a resource that I can't believe I was able to participate in and make happen. But way back in, 79, I was writing for the Z Channel magazine. Z Channel was the first pay TV channel in LA before HBO, Showtime, any of those. It was just local. And I had pitched to the program director the idea of interviewing genre people and showing their films afterwards.
Right.
And so, they had the library of films that they had bought. And he would tell me, okay, we got these, who would you get? And so I was able to actually do these as a very young fan of the genre and not do Hollywood type interviews about their latest movie or this or that, but just talk to them about the movies we were showing and then other general things. It'd be a 15-minute interview before the movie would play. And I was not a pro at all. I had done interviews for magazines like Cinefantastique, Fangoria, things like that. But this, I was a nervous young film journalist and film fan, especially in the genre. And so I managed to get Steven Spielberg and John Carpenter and John Landis and all these people.
That's so awesome.
And they became friends,
Very much.
Thanks. Working for Spielberg kind of came out of that.
Yeah.
And so that was something really exciting. I recorded them on Betamax when they were on the air, and what you get on Mick Garris Interviews are my old Betamax recordings that have been transferred digitally, all of the ones that I own. So you'll see tracking issues and blurriness and all that. But the content is pretty phenomenal. Some of the people we got there. They're not all great interviews, and they're not all great guests, but I did about 30 shows, and I guess about 20 of them are online. Some of them are long lost. And then 30 years later, I got the chance to do this show called Postmortem with FearNet. And we did 10 of those. And it was great. Some of them were the same people that had been done 30 years ago. William Friedkin was on both shows. John Landis was on both shows. John Carpenter was on both shows. And to side by side see 30-year apart interviews, by an eager young film fan and journalist versus a guy who has fought in the same trenches with them. I won't call them peers because they are the geniuses of the genre. And, I do the best work that I know how to do it. hopefully continue to grow because of conversations with these guys and insights that they get.
Yeah, definitely.
And one of the things about Postmortem in particular was every one of those interviews, I learned something I'd never heard from them before, because the forum was such that most of them were my friends before the shows were even recorded. And they were comfortable, and it wasn't about anything specific. It was more general about their careers and anything we wanted to talk about, and to be able to go in the tributary. Each one we taped for about an hour, and then we cut them down to a half hour. And it was great because they were very comfortable and relaxed and unguarded.
Yeah.
And it was uncensored, and there were no commercials, so there was nobody we had to worry about offending. So you could say fuck if you wanted to say fuck.
Yeah, that's great.
And you could say whatever you want, and they became very open. Carpenter is a very open interview. He's amazing and very cynical and very funny, but in a good way.
And this is a free site
and so the site is completely free.
Okay.
There's no advertising or anything. You might get an ad on the beginning of part one of the videos because of the way YouTube works.
Yeah, sure.
But the whole intent was Postmortem. Well, once Postmortem reverted to me, they had a 3-year window where they had an exclusive right for the shows for FearNet, and then I owned the shows completely afterwards. So I decided, I wanted to do like a Blu-ray package or something like that because they're all HD and everything, and they were well produced by Perry Martin. And when that didn't really come together, I just decided, fuck it, because nobody outside the U.S. could get into the FearNet site. They couldn't see it. And I go to a lot of festivals around the world and made a lot of genre friends in different countries that I wanted to share this stuff with. And so the main reason was to just put it out there so anybody wanted to see them could. So, there's the YouTube channel of Mick Garris interviews you can subscribe to. All of them are up now. It used to be we put one new show up a week. One new fantasy film festival from the Z channel and one new Postmortem. And they're all up now.
What was the best advice you ever received in all your years working in the movie business? Was there one particular thing that you heard? Yeah.
There's one thing I will always remember. When I first was working on Amazing Stories, I had written several of them and worked as story editor on the first season. The second season, Stephen gave me the opportunity to direct one. And one of the best things anybody ever said was what he told me. Don't worry about getting fired. Take chances. Do something that you'd be afraid of getting fired to do, because I'm not going to fire you. Be adventurous. Take chances. Break the rules. And
Stephen said this.
Yeah, Stephen said that to me, and it was like so freeing.
That's awesome.
Because, you get your first chance to direct. I had done this TV movie for Disney, was the first thing I'd done. And, it was successful, but it's not very good.
Yeah.
A lot of children at that time are adults now who you can now order it on demand from Amazon and stuff, but from Disney. But this episode of Amazing Stories called Life on Death Row with Patrick Swayze, that was the first time I felt like a director. It has a visual style that is very distinct. And it was really, I took what he said to heart. That wasn't what led what I made, the philosophy that led me as I made the film. But it was always at the back of my head. I go, well, this is a little, I don't know about it. Fuck it, let's do it,
Yeah.
And I never want to be timid or sedate about everything. And it's easy to be. If you make a comfortable living, live comfortably as an artist, you stop reaching. And so it's one of the reasons that I want to do this movie in Mexico. It's something completely unlike anything I've ever done. And thank you, Stephen, for that.
Yeah, right? That's a great story. Stephen. If the Critters were to face off against the Gremlins, who do you think would win?
Money always wins. Gremlins would beat the shit out of money.
That's all right. All right. All right, cool.